In the next part of this tutorial, we're going to create the sleeve that goes around the gum components. So I'm going to come over here and turn those gum components off. And so that we're all on the same page, I've created profiles that we're going to use to guide the process. The first thing that I want to do is come down to the base profile, and we're going to duplicate that and use that as our starting point. So I'm going to press Shift D, and then I'm going to press Escape, and I'm going to move that up. But what I want to do is come into the front leave perspective, and I want to match this horizontal profile and get it basically about like that. Okay, let's bring up the context menu, and we're going to convert this explicitly to a polygon mesh because it's just a closed Bezier curve. Press the Tab key. It's unfilled, so we don't see a fill on it. So press the A key, bring up the context menu, and then come down to New Edge Faces from Vertices to fill that. Okay, come back into Front. And then we're going to extrude this up until it gets to the top, right like that. I'm going to select in face mode, this face, hold the Shift key and select this face, and then press the X key because we don't need those, so we're going to delete those. I'm going to come over and have us turn on face orientation. You can see that red means it's going inward and not outward. We want it to go outward. So I'm going to press the A key, come up to mesh, and then normals, and we're going to flip those to go to the outside. Okay, let's turn that off because that'll get annoying pretty quickly. So the next thing that we need to do is let's take note of the fact that we have a cutout here that's going to be on both the top and the bottom. And if I come into outline, press Option Z, there's going to be a cutout right there. In fact, that profile is hidden. Let me turn that on so we can see. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is come in and just do some quick dicing up. So I'm going to come back into edit mode. Let's come over to the loop cut function. I'm going to press Option Z again to turn off X-ray. Click once there, there, and then also on the sides. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to be having some symmetry top to bottom because of this cutout right here, which is on both sides, but the window cutout here is not going to be on both sides. So we're only going to work on one side for right now. So I'm going to come in here, press Option Z again to go into outline mode, and in face, we're just going to select across the bottom faces, and I'm going to press the X key to delete those so that we can only need to concern ourselves with the top. Okay, Option Z goes back into regular mode, come back into the top. And we need to dice this up a little bit more. So there's also going to be a slight amount of curvature, and we need to add geometry that's going to allow for that. So let's come back over to the loop cut function, and I'm going to add one there, there. Now let's come over to this side and add a little bit more geometry there, there. And we also need to sort of think about the amount of geometry that's needed up here. So I'm going to go one step further and add cuts like that, and then I'll add two more over on that side. In fact, we'll come over here, add one there, and we'll add another one there. And then on this side, we're going to cut that up in half, and that's going to be a good starting point. Okay, so there we go. Let's come back down to the bottom, and I'm going to take this loop and match it up to the profile there, and this one comes down here. That's pretty easy. Now this, let's take a look at this. We're going to use this loop to help partially form this curvature right here when we cut that out. So do we really need to concern ourselves with these being perfectly distributed? Probably not too much. So I'm just going to come over and grab that and move that about like that. And we'll do the same thing here. And we can make a decision, you know, whether we want this one. I think actually maybe this one I'll move since it's slightly closer. Then I'm going to come over into face mode, and I'm going to remove these. So these are the ones that we don't need. X key, and we're going to delete those faces. And there is the little window that will show the gum in the background. I'm going to press the Tab key and remove that since we don't need that anymore. Tab key takes me back in. Okay, so let's come back up to the top and let's start forming this. I'm going to take this loop and move this a little bit closer like that. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to press the K key, and I'm going to come like this, and I'm going to roughly cut this out. I'm going to place a point right there and right there and right there, just roughly getting that in, hit return. And then in face mode, we will just take these, press the X key, and we'll delete these. Now, the cool thing about this is that we don't really need to get perfect here, because subdivision surface is going to give us the curvature, but I'm just going to roughly form these. And what my goal here is to take and move it so that the center is what's on the profile, generally. Okay, so we'll take it and move these down about like that. And then this one over here, we've got this extra thing, so we can anchor that. I'm going to press the K key, and I'll just anchor that over like that, and that's good. Having a triangle inside of a quad-based subdivision surface here and there isn't a big deal. Press the K key. In fact, I can do the same thing. I'm going to anchor that there. And then, K key, and I'll do that right there also. And then we'll just do a little bit more forming work, because again, the center of the edge is what I generally want to have touching the curve template profile. Now, if you look right here, there's one, I think we could probably add another cut right there. So I'm going to press the K key, and I'm just going to anchor that right like that. And then I can move that down a little bit more close to the template. And that works. We're going to have very subtle curvature on the top, and so we have some freedom with having these be slightly irregular. It's not something I'm going to get too bent out of shape about. Now we can come in and turn on subdivision for this object, and we can actually take a look at that. So we'll come over to subdivision, and let's take this to a value of 2 so we get a little bit better representation. So we get pretty close. Let's take this point, and we want those not to be subdivided through. So we're going to come over to vertex crease, and just mouse to the right until those snap into place. So that works pretty well, pretty close to what I need it to be. In fact, we can turn off optimal display, which doesn't show up until you leave subdivision, and you can kind of see how the subdivided polygons form. Okay, good enough. So let's do this. I'm going to actually press the tab key again, and I just want to remove that. So I'm going to press X. We'll come back over here, turn back on optimal display. And let's refocus over here. So what we want to do is we don't want this to be rounded. We want it to be perfectly square. So I'm going to come over into edge mode, and I'm going to select these loops there, and we're going to press the E key, and we're going to just mouse until those become fully sharp creases. Okay, until this crease factor becomes a value of 1. Okay, now since we've gotten this done, what we want to do is we want to come in and add geometry that's going to constrain the rounding of the subdivision right here. So back in edit mode, we're in edge selection mode. So I'm going to double click this edge loop, hold the shift key, double click this edge loop. Let's zoom down, and we're going to come over to the bevel tool. We want it to be 2 segments with a shape of 1. And I'm going to switch this over to active tool, and that's going to make it easier to do this operation. Click, hold, and drag on any place, and then just begin pulling that. And you can see that that's going to give us a little bit of rounding that's constrained, and that'll work pretty well. So now we can just look at this in like a shaded mode and see that. Okay, so there we go. That's working pretty well. Now let's do the other side. So we're going to come into front. I'm going to turn off subdivision temporarily. Now, what we need to do in order to mirror this is we need to get the object's center exactly here. So when it mirrors, it'll do it correctly. So I'll go into edit mode, vertex, select that vertex. We're going to come to Shift S, and we're going to do cursor to selected. Okay, leave edit mode, and then we're going to switch back up here to object, do set object origin to 3D cursor. Okay, there we go. Now when we come over to the mirror function, we can add a mirror modifier. right there. And we just need to change it to the z-axis. And then it'll mirror around that point we just moved. So that's correct. Okay, so let's come back over into wireframe so we can sort of see this. And what I want to do is permanently apply this. This is something that we don't want to have as a modifier because we need the geometry to operate on. So we're just going to apply that. Okay, so let's come back into edit mode. So on the bottom here, we don't need, I'm going to turn on perspective to help visualize this. We don't need this one on the bottom. So come over into edge mode, double click around that and it'll select that perimeter. Hold the shift key to deselect these two edges, bring up the context menu and then bridge those edge loops. And then we need to continue these hard edges. So I'm going to double click those hard edges there, hold the shift key, double click these and then press shift and E and just scroll left to right and then just make sure the factor is 1. And there we go. Let's come in and remove all these profiles that we've got going on. There's only one that we're going to retain for right now. Let's remove those. And it's this bottom one that's going to give us a sense for a flap that folds together. In fact, let's turn our attention to the flap next. I'm going to come into the front. I'm just going to move that down a little bit. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to bring the 3D cursor and kind of put it right there, so that we can focus on that area. Okay, tab key goes into edit mode. What I want to do is I need to dissociate this edge because the flap is going to come down and it comes inward and it glues to this lower piece of paper, whereas right now it's a continuous sort of loop of polygons. So this is what we do. We have down here a rip edge function. We're going to do this in edge mode. Now the way that this works is that when we have this loop, it's going to take into account where our cursor is on either side of this. So if I come above it and I press the V key, it's going to rip that polygon on top. What I want to do is I want to only now move it up along the Z axis. So I'm going to press the Z key and then I'm going to double click on this loop and I want to bring this up a little bit higher like that. Double click here again, tap the E key to extrude, tap X to only come in that far, E key again, X. Okay, now let's come back into the top view without perspective. Option Z takes us into X-ray mode. And I want to get it right to here. So I'm going to press G, X, and we'll match that to my template profile. Okay, let's scale this. S, and then Y. Right there. Good. Okay, tab key, and I'm going to select this, press the X key because we no longer need that. Let's do a little bit more forming work. Option Z takes us out of X-ray, and we're going to use the loop cut function, and I'm going to pull one right there. Click, hold, and drag, and I'm going to pull another one right there. Now, let's come in and I want to take this little loop, just move that a little bit closer to that corner, and we need to do the same thing to the other side. Option Z, take that edge, we're going to move that one closer there, so that when we subdivide this, we'll have just these nice little rounded corners at that point. Okay, so there we go. Option Z. Okay, so what we're ready to do now is add some thickness to this and assign some materials and give it a deformation lattice. Let's come in first and UV map this. So we've got this complete enough that we can UV pretty easily. And this is going to be a fairly easy shape to UV map. And since it's open, it's no longer a closed surface. We don't need to put any cuts in there. So I'm going to press the A key, select all the polygons, and then we're just going to come up to the UV editor. We're going to tell it to unwrap. So let's come back to modeling. And now we just want to add some thickness to this. So we're going to come over now and add a Solidify modifier, and that's going to be enormous by default. Let's type in 0.008. Okay, there we go. And, you know, that's something you can play with in terms of the thickness that you need, but we can come back in and turn on subdivision and we can see how it kind of produces that nice organic rounding right there. Because what we need to do is have a material for the outer label, the sleeve, and then the white paper that it sits on, which is going to be the thickness in the interior paper. So we're going to come over and we're going to add 2 slots, and the top slot we're going to call sleeve label, and the bottom is just going to be white paper. Okay, so here's how this works. Let's make this really obvious. In fact, let's switch over into a shaded mode. And by default, the top one is going to be what has applied to everything. So we're going to make this apparent by assigning a color. So that's really clear. We want the bottom white to be on the edge and the interior. So we're going to come back here to the modifier stack, and we're going to come down in the Solidify to materials, and we want to put in a material index of 1 and watch what happens. A value of 1 tells it to use the first material in the material stack underneath the top one for the generated thickness component. Pretty easy. Now you can see for the thickness here, we do have the label also. So we need to come back here, and we need to also give the rim a value of 1. So that's how that works. Okay, so let's prepare this for the lattice. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave edit mode. We're going to come back into front so we can see this. And I'm going to return the origin to geometry so it's right at the center. And actually, you know what? There's one other thing I want to do. The flap right here, we need to add a little bit more geometry. So I actually am going to come in to the loop cut function. I'm going to add one more loop right in the middle because we are going to be deforming this, and it would be good to have a slight extra piece of geometry there to work with. Okay, tab key leaves, come into the front view, shift A to add, and we're going to add a lattice. It's going to, I don't know why that's there. Let's come over. Oh, it added it where the cursor was. Okay, so let's do this. Shift S, cursor to selected, and there it goes to the object's origin at an object level. Shift A, we're going to add that lattice. It's going to be enormous by default. Let's just type in a value of 2. And here's what we do. We press the S key and we start scaling it until it just barely encompasses the object. S key again, but in this case, we're going to tap Z and we're going to bring that down so it's pretty close to it. And then in the top view, S and then Y, and we're going to take that so it's just outside of it. Now, this is one of the few instances where you do not want to apply scale. You want to leave that as it is for it to work correctly. The next thing that we need to do is we need to come down here to the lattice object data entry, and let's type in a value of 7 this way and a value of 3 and 3. Okay, that gives us enough resolution to work with. So we're going to call this, in fact, I'm going to move this outside of profiles. We're going to take this and move it outside of profiles, and I'm just going to rename this sleeve. There we go. Okay, and we're going to call this sleeve lattice. Okay, so in sleeve, we need to come here and we actually need to tell it to add a modifier to hook it to the lattice. Okay, so we're going to come here, hook it there, and then we're ready to deform it. So we select the lattice, tab key takes us into edit mode. And what I'm going to do is marquee across these center ones, S key, and then the Z key, and we're going to move those up just like that. Just because when I had the physical product, it had a little bit of that bubbliness to it, if you want to think about it like that. Take this over here and this over there, S key, and then X, and we're going to pull that out just a little bit like that to give it rounding. Okay, so that's why we came in and added the extra bit of geometry here, just because there's a slight amount of deformation to that area. Okay, so there we go. And pretty much done with this segment. Let's come over and preview that. And there we go. So that wasn't too difficult to model for the sleeve component.